Okay, level set and all those kinds of things. All those kinds of things, with the mixing board and the laptop and the microphone and all those kinds of things. We're working very hard here. Okay. Me, la, 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 la. Near the two. Tell the rabble to be quiet. We anticipate a riot. This common crowd is much too loud. Tell the mobs who sing your songs that they are fools and they are wrong. They are a curse. They should disperse. Why waste your breath moaning at the crowd? Nothing you can do can stop the shouting. If every tongue was stilled, the praise would just continue. The rocks and stones themselves would start to sing. Okay, I don't know if you know where that was from, but one of the things we want to do here is you can send in your comments, give me a call, let me know where that comes from. That was from a classic, iconic event in the late 1900s. This is the Jeremiah Gunn Show. Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard. This is CSN. You're listening to CSN, the Common Sense Network. This is on the ISI broadcasting system. The Jeremiah Gunn Show. Jeremiah Gunn Show, trigger warning. You are at a gun show. And I'm an undocumented expert, and I'm synthesizing and summarize the metastasized lies of the Lord of the Flies. With no compromise, we keep our eyes on the prize. Just wanted to let you know. This is talking to the whole world. As I'm sitting here, I'm picturing the whole world. Everybody on earth. It doesn't matter where you're from. All of the world is watching America, and all of America is watching TV or the internet or their cell phone or their selfie or whatever. Anyway, I just thinking about every one of you. I absolutely love you all, and I care. Like a father cares about his kids, and a grandfather, and an uncle, and a manager, supervisor, if they're good. They care about you guys, and you're being lied to. That is our new religion, the Lord of the Flies, the father of all lies. That's all he's doing is hypnotize. And somebody's got to tell you the truth. Someone's got to tell you the truth. And that's what we're trying to do. This Jeremiah Gunn Show is dedicated to Charlie Kirk, the last martyr, truth teller that we have had, that was like a comet streaking across our world, shining the light on the cockroaches who don't like that very much. Anyway, I like to open up with music, and I love Ray Charles, and I love his Oh Beautiful, the song called America. And what are the first lyrics? Oh, beautiful, for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. That's it, baby. That's all you're going to get. So I'm going to talk about history. History, Malcolm, history. This is history, Malcolm, history. Anyway, why is it important? This is just a fast walkthrough of the history of the United States. I call it the magical, tragical history tour of us. Remember, whenever I say us, it's an abbreviation, it's an acronym, United States, U.S. Okay? That's a simple request, isn't it? It's what our founding fathers wanted. It's what they tried to create, e pluribus unum. So you're being lied to, and it's like a religion. Every single thing they tell you that you have to believe, even about religion or the United States or the Constitution, everything, it's just a lie. And that's what Marxists do. They erase history and substitute their own. Revisionism and confusion, really. Because if they break up, if you don't know who you are or whose you are, then you don't know where to go. If you don't know how you got here, why is history important? Whoever forgets the past is condemned to repeat it. And I like to open with a few quotes all the time. Memory is the soul of a race. Insanity is the loss of memory. To be ignorant of what happened before you were born is to remain a child. That's part of the goal. It's so bizarre, so ironic. They want to lower the age of consent and make children responsible for adult decisions to ruin them because misery loves company. But they also want to say they're just children. So if they murder a bunch of people, they're just a child. But if you want to murder them, it don't matter whether they're a child or not. If you want to mutilate them, if you want to execute them, that's kind of the tip of the spear of the lies. Just as an example, you want to execute somebody while they're sleeping in the womb, trusting their mommy and daddy to take care of them. You don't want to do it to a serial killer. You have a candlelight vigil to him because you respect life. I mean, if these things don't wake you up. So anyway, we're going to talk about history here. It's what time is it? That's what Charlie Kirk asked. What time? Where are we at? You got to look around. I was one of my degrees was in computer science and in data communications specifically. And the clocks were very important. You couldn't do any communication without a clock. It had to synchronize the transmission and so forth. When you hear the word ATM, you might think of a little kiosk on the side of a building or something, Wells Fargo, whatever. But to me, it was the whole world was nothing but acronyms. ATM meant asynchronous transfer mode. So, a clock's very important. So, like, what time is it? What time is it? And you can't say, well, let's not turn back the clock. You can't turn back the clock. It has nothing. That's not how you're talking about time. But time and space, the way they relate, that was how they knew a 1 from a 0, which was basically the Morse code of communication. Computer, that miracle you hold in your hand, that little thing that does everything, absolute miracle, that came from Boolean logic, 1s and 0s. That's it. It's like a light switch. It's on or it's off. That was the whole basis, a building block of everything. But without a clock, you couldn't know. So, what time is it? Memory is the soul of a race. Insanity is the loss of memory. To be ignorant of what happened before you were born is to remain a child. So let's just do a little walkthrough of the United States of America, the greatest nation in the history of civilization, the history of women. Period. Irrefutable. And if you don't like it, including if you're teaching at one of the Ivy Leagues or one of the UC systems or whatever in the Democrat government education media attainment complex. I'm going to repeat myself a lot. If you've listened to a few episodes, you'll hear the same kind of things because they are the most important things. And to tell you where we're at, we're behind enemy lines in a civil war. That's where we're at. So we've got to find out, how do we get here? And what is this constitution they talk about when they say it's a constitutional crisis? Where did it come from? If you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going. So let's just, this country's not that old. It's been here 250 years, if you count it from the Declaration of Independence, which is what they date it from. That's why Lincoln dated Gettysburg Address from there, not from 1787 or whenever we got our Constitution or our first president, George Washington, but from 1776. We had already been at war for several months, almost a year. I guess a year. We'd already been at war with England when they decided to write down the Declaration of Independence. So we're about 250 years old, and we're, halfway in, about 125 years ago, we started to tank. We started to go down. They started to give us cancer and destroy this country. The Democrat Party, a.k.a. progressive, a.k.a. socialist, communist, anarchist, Islamist now. We got to throw them all into the pile. It's all in the pot. Like Isaiah said, there's death in the pot. It's all in there mixed together, big stew. So this country is not very old. I had a friend who went to Belfast or Dublin. And, he had a T-shirt from their millennial. It means they're over 1,000 years old, 4 times what we are. Paris. These countries have millennials celebrations, not because they have millennials in them, but because they've been around for 1,000 years. So let's talk about this country in a kind of a timeline that I envision, that kind of degrees of separation that kind of tell you the story. My dad died not that long ago. He was a World War II generation. He served in World War II in the Pacific, in the Navy. Anyway, he on the East Coast and in Normandy, there was a general named Teddy Roosevelt Jr. He was Teddy Roosevelt Jr. in same time as my dad, who again died not that long ago. My dad, when he was a kid in New York City, he saw a parade of Civil War veterans. He saw a parade of Civil War veterans, my dad, when he was a kid. So we're kind of connected to right now in a way. He served with Teddy Roosevelt Jr. Teddy Roosevelt Jr.'s father was Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt's father worked for Lincoln. He did a lot of good work. He was a good man, very wealthy. Huh. Oh, no. Yeah, well, no, very wealthy, but very good. You know, on the way home from work, they'd go to a soup kitchen and things like that. The whole family had to, along with physical fitness. I mean, they were squared away people. But they had an obligation to their fellow man through their faith, through their morality, through their Americanism. So my dad was in the Army and in the Navy. In the Army was Teddy Roosevelt Jr. He was like 54 years old. He went ashore at Normandy, and the second or so day on the beachhead, they were going to make him, he was a general, they were going to make him responsible for the whole area, and he actually died of a heart attack or something, so they couldn't. His father was Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt's father worked for Lincoln. When Lincoln was born, Thomas Jefferson was president. That's it. We're back. My dad and his contemporary, Teddy Roosevelt Jr. Next generation, Teddy Roosevelt. Next generation, his dad, who worked for Lincoln. When that generation, Lincoln was born, Jefferson was. That's it. It's half a dozen people, and we're back to where we get back to where we started. So how did this country start? Well, this hemisphere started when the Indians came from Asia. Some people say they walked across the Bering Strait. I call them Menaks because they're not indigenous. They're not indigenous to here. They're not First Nations the way the Canadians pander to them. I call them Menaks, which stands for Migrant Native Asian Communities. That's what they were. They were roving migrants of gangs and clans and tribes, and they came and took over all this land on foot. They didn't have the horse. So what they did while they were here was they fought over the land. They enslaved each other, tortured each other. They were really into torture. Bad things. I know an awful lot about Menaks, an awful lot. I before I called them Menaks, I called them native Siberians. Anyway, so this guy named Columbus came here. I think he was red-haired. Some think he was a Sephardic Jew. He might have been Jewish. We call the area District of Columbia. That's the epicenter of our cancer, the District of Columbia. The statue of the woman on top of the Capitol or whatever, name's Columbia. What does that come from? What is the country Columbia? Where does all this Columbia come from? It comes from Columbus. I was a project manager for a big high-tech firm, and I had to meet with the contractors and the customer, tenant, client, whatever you want to call it, the person that was representing the engineers who needed that lab built or building or whatever. Well, one of the contractors, the subcontractors on this effort, his last name was Colon, C-O-L-O-N. And before the meeting started, we would kind of chit-chat, and I said, hey, that your name means Columbus. And he says, yeah, that's right, that's correct. In Spanish, Christopher Columbus is Cristobal Colon, or Cristobal, ends with an L, but Cristobal Colon. So we got the name Columbia, District of Columbia, Columbia Pictures, whatever you want. It all came from Columbus. He's out now. So why did he come here in 1492? In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's what they taught us before they were teaching us to hate him. Why was he looking for a road to India? Why was that so important? Why did he work so hard on that and pitch it to the brass, to the royalty? Because that was also the year of the Reconquista, which means reconquer, when the Spanish kicked out the Muslims who had taken over. When you talk about the Crusades, if you want to go back to the Crusades, it's because the Islamic Crusaders took over. They went to Vienna, they went to Spain. It's kind of interesting. I mean, think about like the word El. That one of the big battles in World War II was El Alamein. And is the word El pretty important in Spanish? I think it came from that. I don't think that the Muslims got it from the Spanish. I think it was the other way around. They called them the Moors. But so El this and all that. When I was in 10th grade Spanish or something like that, we had this sentence we had to learn about. This couple goes to a restaurant and they look at how nice the lights are. Fíjate que bien están las luces. Look at how nice the lights are. But then the other thing they say is like, there's seats available now, and yesterday, ya no quedaba una mesa desocupada. Ojalá que se mejore pronto. I hope you feel better soon. You don't tell me that don't sound like Arabic. Anyway, so the Muslims had taken over the known world. And what was important to Europe? The Silk Road. It went through Turkey and Afghanistan or whatever, went to India and China. Well, the Muslims took it over and said, nope, you can't have it anymore. Just like the Straits of Hormuz. Same old, same old. So he had to find a route. And that's why they was so hopeful. And that's why it was such an important thing that he did. So, don't act like he was bad and they were good. And the noble savages, they used to make movies in Hollywood. I think the idea of the noble savage comes from Rousseau. The word savage, sauvage in French, all it means is wilderness, wild forests. They lived in the wild. They lived in the wild, indigenous, if you will. But that's all it meant. But they had this idea of the noble savage, and then Hollywood sort of went through this thing. They went through this phase of making. How many westerns did they make? 4.5 billion. But in every western, Indians bad, cowboys good. Period. And then the 1970s, we started this self-flagellation and bury my heart at Wounded Knee, all this stuff. And we started to say, oh, no, Indians good, cowboys bad. Period. As if it's that simple. These are the same people that always tell you simplistic. It's simplistic. You're making it it's more complex than that. But it isn't when it's their angle that they're slinging. So, the Indians were here fighting amongst each other and dying off. And then the Europeans came, the white Europeans. Remember that they were Europeans. They were white because they were Europeans. They weren't Europeans because they were white. That'll come in handy later. Just remember that. It's important when we talk about the Hispanic syndrome that we're suffering from. So the English, who came here first, came the Vikings, Leif Erikson, whatever, came over to like Nova Scotia, the Basques and Italians or whatever. They were fishing. There was a great book called Cod that a friend turned me on to, just the history of the cod fishing industry. Absolutely fascinating. There's books about all these things, cotton, gold, water, paper. There are books about them that just take them as a single subject. They're utterly fascinating. Well, what happened was these fishermen would come over and they'd catch fish and they'd dry them on the shores and they'd interface with the Indians and probably, they said Columbus, I think they said he and his guys had syphilis or gonorrhea. I don't think they got that on the ship. I think they got it ashore. But anyway, they brought things like a plague to the Indians and just killed them all off. So who came here? Vikings, Basques, Italians, French, Spanish, English, Russians came in the Northwest. They have a Russian settlement in California called Fort Ross. It's a very interesting place to go to. They were all the way there. They were all the way down in there. The English were immigrants, not migrants, not conquistadors. The area in the West, because why weren't they migrants? Because they were fleeing for asylum. They came here to have a new country, and they were going to get along with the Indians, just like the French under Champlain. They were going to just cohabitate and everything, but they were immigrating to a country that was already established by the Pilgrims and so forth. So what the Spanish, for their part, they took the western and southern part of the United States. They went all the way to Missouri. Was that Cortez? I mean, went all the way to Missouri, but and certainly Florida. A certain number of our states have Spanish names. Some of them have Indian names. Most of them, the slight majority. Anyway, they called this area New Spain. New Spain. Remember that when Mexico had their revolution, they were fighting against Spain to become a country. But this was New Spain, just like New York, New Jersey, New Hampshire, New Amsterdam. This part was called New Spain, but we somehow want to kind of forget that for some reason. So the Spanish, they established missions. That, their thing was kind of supposed to be gold, glory, and God. Yeah, they spread Christianity to these noble savages with the sword. Okay. Yeah, correct. The white Europeans did that. Remember, keep that in mind. So anyway, they established the missions all the way up and down California. When you live in California and your kids, 4th or 5th grade, they got to make a mission out of sugar cubes and plaster Paris or something, or cardboard, styrofoam. You can probably buy a kit now at Michael's art store to make it, because they want to kill your imagination entirely. But anyway, they just established missions. Well, what was a mission? It was on this thing called El Camino Real. It's the oldest highway in the country. And the mission was like one day's journey. They were like Motel 6s, and they connected all the way up, and they had all these Catholic Christian names, which are still in existence. We went to a wedding at an old, I think it was the first mission. It's in San Diego, and it has a date of when it was built, and it was way before the. I think it was 100 years before our Declaration of Independence. So they were over here doing their thing. Those Europeans. Anyway, there was a sort of, it's all made out of adobe and everything, but there's this tile in the floor that's probably adobe or something, and it had a dog's paw print in it. Like if a dog walks across your new sidewalk or driveway and you leave a paw print in it, or maybe you intentionally put it in there. But I thought, that thing is that paw print, that dog walked through that wet adobe or whatever, 100 years before blessed founding fathers. Crazy. So anyway, El Camino Real went through, among other places, Los Angeles. You know what the real name for Los Angeles that the Spanish gave it? It's La Ciudad de Nuestra Señora, la Reina de los Ángeles. La Ciudad de Nuestra Señora, la Reina de los Ángeles de Porciúncula. So it's the city of Our Lady, the Queen of the Angels of Porciúncula, which was some river in Spain or something. They always had, that's like Sacramento, it had a longer name. It was basically like the Blessed Sacrament. All these religious places, all the way from, Sacramento and San Francisco, St. Francis, all the way down to Florida. St. Augustine, the oldest city in America. St. Augustine and Santa Ana, it's saint. It's everything's Santa this and Santa Barbara. Okay, so La Ciudad de Nuestra Señora, la Reina de los Ángeles. What do we say? L.A. Yeah, I grew up in L.A. It's kind of funny, the way that Americans do this stuff. Cut it down to just boom, L.A. Kind of cool. Anyway, so on the East Coast, Northeast Coast, the Mayflower, they were seeking asylum. They were asylum seeking immigrants, not not uh, not migrants trying to recreate with the help of the Democrat Party and the assistance what they fled. They were asylum seeking immigrants coming here to a part of the country that the Dutch East India Company or West India Company, whatever, carved out, and the British carved out with these charters to say, we'll make this. That's how Georgia started. It was a second chance act for debtors and prisoners and things. Not the vile prisoners, but people who you got thrown in prison for being poor in England. So you paid off your debts. It was kind of a second chance. That's the way Australia was. So they came here. But you know what? One thing that the Puritans who set up our first government, they were fleeing Catholics, unfortunately. And so this plays into our history and our relationship to Catholics, the Irish, the French, Italians, but generally Catholics. The King James Bible, it's kind of ironic because it was named for King James, but those guys kind of fled because of Catholic, evangelical fundamental Christians will dig the King James Bible, but our founding fathers, our original founding fathers of the Mayflower Compact, our first Constitution, they were fleeing. So the King James Bible, I researched it one day. It's not the first version of the Bible in English. It was the 10th. It was the 10th. There were guys like Wycliffe, what they've named the Wycliffe Bible translators after, Tyndale. And these people, the Bloody Mary and all these other the Catholic kings, they would destroy these people. I think one of those, either Wycliffe or Tyndale, they killed them and then they dug him up and they hanged him and they dug him up and burned him. I mean, it just couldn't get enough. One time in the 1400s, the mid 1400s, they put together a bunch of money and bought up all the Bibles. So we'll just buy them up. We won't confiscate them like the communist Chinese or the Soviets or the East Germans or whatever. We'll just buy them up so the people can't have them. That was the whole goal. Whereas the Mayflower's goal was to have religious freedom. That's why we were founded. Not freedom from religion, freedom of religion. In the Spanish Inquisition, you kind of make a joke about it, but the Puritans, the Pilgrims, they fled that tyranny. And not too long ago, the Pope, Catholic Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, was talking about the Inquisition and all this terrorism and the nightmare that they unleashed. He put it this way: well, the church didn't know her place back then. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, it may not be fair in terms of numbers to compare the popes of the Inquisition and all that persecution and the Jesuits who were like stormtroopers. It may not be fair to compare them to Hitler or Stalin or Mao because of the vast numbers, but maybe not even Pol Pot, but certainly a tyrant who killed a lot of people. But just imagine if Hitler said, well, the Third Reich didn't really know her place. Is that a fair explanation of it? It isn't even an apology. It is crazy. So anyway, getting back to the Manacs, migrant native Asian communities, they will say that they were killed off by us. Not really. And they killed a lot of us being United States. They killed a lot of settlers and pilgrims and everything. Abraham Lincoln's grandfather was just plowing a field, and they shot him from the back with arrows, I think. Killed him. And they had great contempt for that because they said they killed him by stealth, like a sniper. Like they don't come and fight him in a fair fight. They just kill him while he's minding his own business, kind of. So they were killed off by diseases, so much so that when the Pilgrims got here, I mean, there weren't they said that some historians say that the bodies were still laying stacked up, that it killed so many of them, there weren't enough of them left to bury the dead. There's a book called Gold, Germs, and Steel. Those are the three things that kind of differentiated America and made it feasible to do the manifest destiny and all that stuff. Again, the Spanish, their motto was gold, glory, and God. That is kind of they looked at it as a team effort, but anyway. And just as an aside, don't pretend. Why do academics pretend? Because they're Marxists. Why do they pretend that the Indians were playing patty cake and having wonderful times? And they talk about this counting coup where they didn't even fight each other. They would ride up to each other and tap them on the shoulder or the cheek, and they considered that a win. I mean, they didn't even keep score. It's all BS. It's all CS, which is cow shite. Because we need to start calling it that now. It's not, the bulls have had their day. It's not bull shite. It's not caca del toro, it's caca de la vaca. Because women have taken over and they sling most of it today. So it's only fair to them to honor them and call it that. Call it what it is. So they weren't, the word Carib is named after a tribe, Caribbean. They were cannibals. So, did Columbus really bring them a bad thing with Christianity? The Aztecs were rolling heads down the pyramid steps. Children. And these anthropologists would find this stuff out and it would shock them. Well, it shouldn't. I mean, these were horrible, horrible societies. So, did they really, really bring them a bad thing? Just a slight note here. When you look up, you say, oh, they weren't, were the Carib Indians really cannibals? Yeah, it was pretty horrific to these Catholics, even though they were doing the Inquisition back home, but they thought that was pretty darn bad. And slavery and torture and all the things that these guys did. I remember reading a series in the Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal used to be a great paper. And I remember this series where this guy, he was a doctor, like Doctors Without Borders or, Mercy Ship or whatever, Project Hope or whatever they're called. He started to go down to South America. And there's a sort of a jungle, a buddy of mine told me when he kind of got his eyes open to conservative and proper thinking, he said, they call it a rainforest. It's so romantic. He goes, his girlfriend was from Oregon. They have a lot of rainforest there, but he goes, they call it a rainforest. It's really a jungle. They just have to romanticize everything and I didn't see the movie Avatar. I don't watch cartoons that much, but wasn't that what it was? How noble the savage and we just ruined everything. But so this doctor goes from like Chicago or Michigan or something. It's one of these northern big cities in the Midwest, and he volunteers to go down to this area near the jungle in South America. And what it is there's this fly that bites your face, and it bit this kid's face. And what it does is it does something with its saliva when it bites you, where it just eats your face up, like a flesh-eating fly saliva virus. And this poor kid, his face was half gone, and so this doctor, he's a plastic surgeon. He worked on him and worked on him. Finally, he adopted him, brought him up to Chicago, and I don't know, he had 300 operations or something, just as much as they could do them, as when they could do them, and built the kid a new face. And I thought, there's something to be said for asphalt, isn't there? And DDT. And Teddy Roosevelt built the Panama Canal. He had to first conquer malaria and yellow fever and mosquitoes before he could do any engineering and construction. Walter Reed, the famous medical hospital, some of these doctors that got involved in this. So you got to first, there's something to be said for paving over the rainforest if it gets rid of these flies that eat your face. Don't you think? So, I don't think everything we brought them was so bad. If it was, why do they keep coming here? And when I say we, I'm not talking about the Spanish. I'm talking about us, the United States. So, anyway, John Adams, coming up towards our revolution, his founding fathers were the Pilgrims and Puritans, as were all the founding fathers' fathers, the Pilgrims and the Puritans. But he said, no king but Jesus. I had this revolution. And, I saw John MacArthur, his famous Christian Christian teacher, minister. He was on the Ben Shapiro show, and he got it all wrong. He says, we never should have broken away from England. We didn't have the right to do that. Well, maybe yes and maybe no. The New Testament does say that you're supposed to pray for the ones that have rule over you, and God put them there and all this stuff, right? Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar. But once our founding fathers said that they also found in the in the Bible, disobedience to tyrants is obedience to God. They wanted the first seal of this country to show Moses leading the slaves out of Egypt. It's like the way they fled England and Europe. They wanted to leave that dysfunctional nightmare behind and start something fresh where you could be free. So once John MacArthur, once our founding fathers, they're our founding fathers. They're the ones we're responsible to. If I go to work, I'm responsible to the CEO that used to run the company. Sorry. I mean, I don't know where you get these ideas, but he was very smart. He was a very smart guy, John MacArthur, and so is Ben Shapiro. But that's a CS argument. Anyway, John Adams said, no king but Jesus. And so John Adams, before the revolution, we're just kind of walking up this timeline. He defended the British troops at the Boston Massacre, where Crispus Attucks, who was our first martyr, really. I mean, there were other people killed, but he stood out because he was part black and part Indian. He's one of the guys I might put on the statues in front of the new Mount Rushmore, or the second Mount Rushmore. He was a hero. He was one of the guys killed. But so John Adams, Boston attorney, he takes on the role of defending the British troops at the Boston Massacre. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, not because he's an Anglophile, because he's a slave to the king. He was trying to do justice. They needed to have a fair trial. He wasn't too popular walking home to his house in Boston, but you do the right thing. So there was this Puritan ethos versus the Catholic ethos. We talked about that on another show, and their belief of mercantilism. Mercantilism is this idea that if you have too much of the stuff, then I don't get any, which is it's just not true. It's just a fallacious way of looking at capitalism. Because what's this guy from Amazon, Bezos is rich, I don't get to have anything. It doesn't work that way. It's not a diminishing returns, and it's not a zero-sum transaction. Adam Smith proved all that. Just because he has too much in your mind, that doesn't mean you don't get any. Anyway, but Catholics were preaching the Catholic ethos was mercantilism and profit is bad, and today, and socialism is not good. But anyway, certainly the Puritan ethos was against socialism. In the Mayflower Compact, which was our first, how did William Bradford, how did these guys save because it was failing? The colony, the enterprise here in America, colony, it was failing. It wasn't working, and the reason was because people didn't want to work, and the governor went to the New Testament. You think? I mean, where else would he go? And it says in there, in the New Testament, which is half of the Bible, it's the Christian part of the Judeo-Christian Bible, and it says if a man won't work, he don't eat. If a man won't work, he's not going to eat. And so Christians will point to and say Jesus was a communist and they had all things common and a community and commune and they shared. In the book of Acts, they share all their stuff, but then that ends. It comes apart because it didn't work. And he said, if you don't work, you don't eat. Okay? So yeah, it's more blessed to give than to receive. But if you work, you can have something to give instead of just take. So that was kind of our first establishment against socialism, against communism. But today the popes are socialist. So William F. Buckley Jr. is considered the founder, the godfather of maybe along with Goldwater, the father of conservatism. But he was a staunch Catholic, but he wasn't a socialist and a communist. These are new things that are going around. These are all new things. And that's part of the lie. They want you to believe this stuff. Declaration of Independence was about property rights. They considered it to be sacred. When they put together a committee to have to write the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson was the chief writer, but it had Adams and Franklin and Livingston and Roger Sherman from Connecticut, I think. And but Jefferson came up with it, and then they kind of edited it down. Well, he said among these truths are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, happiness just meant opportunity, have a chance. But before they changed it to happiness, happenstance, the right to have a shot, equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. Before it said pursuit of happiness, it said life, liberty, and the pursuit of personal property. Property is sacred. That is the thing with the Catholic kings we're attacking is the middle class. It always comes back to the middle class. And how do you become middle class? By having property. That was the way that was the requirement for voting. Yeah. Somebody who's got skin in the game. Somebody who's part of the club. Not just a strap hanger, not just a parasite. That's not going to work. So they changed it. They changed it to that. But before it said inalienable, we hold these truths. Oh, you know the thing. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Before it said self-evident, it said sacred and undeniable. And if you watch the wonderful HBO series on John Adams, Franklin kind of says, yeah, that smacks of the pulpit. Let's do something more in the age of enlightenment or the age of reason. Let's say self-evident. It sounds more scientific than sacred and undeniable, but that shows you where Jefferson was coming from. Adams liked it a lot. Yeah, that's important. Property, personal property rights were sacred. Just the opposite of the French Revolution. Our revolution was complete opposite. And just like the Indian tribes siding with either the French or the British in the 7 Years' War that led up to our rebellion, our rebellion, just like theirs, was made up of different tribes: English, Irish, Scots, Welsh, Polish, German. The Scots were like John Paul Jones, Thomas Paine, right? They didn't want England ruling over them, and neither did the English descendants who were now called Americans. Germans, French, Poles, they didn't want English rule over them. This lasted all the way to World War I and II. The Irish didn't want to help England fight Germany, either the Hun or Hitler, because they weren't too fond of the English. Same with the French in Canada. I had a Canadian friend who was in World War II, my friend's dad, but he said that the French were not very helpful. They weren't helpful in Europe either. They're not now. Kind of never have been. Joseph Kennedy, the patriarch of the famous Kennedy clan, he was an anti-Semitic, pro-Nazi. He got kicked out of England. The British, under Churchill and everything, they called FDR and said, either he goes to jail or he goes back to your country. We don't want him anymore. He was horrible. Irish. So it's kind of understandable in a way that the Germans and the French and the Poles and the English, the Irish, they didn't want to help England. But they kind of fueled the revolution. Makes sense, doesn't it? Just like you find out at the Alamo. When you go to the Alamo, there's like umpteen flags around the perimeter, and it's all the countries and states that the people at the Alamo came from. It's kind of a mini microcosm of the United States. Anyway, there was a Reformation. There was a Reformation in where the persecution of Christians took a turn, and Islam needs a Reformation. Catholicism needs a Reformation. They got one, but it didn't stick. And interesting. They did have a mistrust of Catholics, but they wanted them to have a place here. We said before it took till 1960 before a Catholic could be president of the United States. There was that much mistrust of them. Why? Unfounded? Unwarranted? No. They were our tormentors. Torquemada, that word comes from torque, from the way they used to twist your limbs to get you to confess. And in the Inquisition. So they established Maryland as a refuge for them. And so they were okay with them being here. Our country was built on compromise and tolerance of religion, not dominance by one particular religion. That's what we're going to talk about next time. When we get back together here, that'll be part 2 of the magical, tragical history tour of us being the United States. Anyway, thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. I really care. I really want to talk to you. I want to take your comments and questions. I'm the answer man. Are you saying you have all the answers? Are you saying you have all the answers? No, I'm saying I know where they are. And I can help because I want to. So let's talk. Please, thank you for listening. Thank you. This is Jeremiah Gunn Show, signing off behind enemy lines to the resistance. Let's do it. Thank you.